What's up, everybody? I'm 24/7 Sports Director Scouting Adam Finkelstein. He's 24/7 Sports National Recruiting Analyst Travis Branham. And as you can see, we are both in our home studios because, frankly, we weren't necessarily expecting to film the show this week. Coming off last week's On the Road in Houston, which was a tremendous success. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. We weren't expecting a big week off the national championship, but as the best plans always go, that blew up because there have been a ton of commitments out of the portal, some major news out of the high school recruiting ranks, and just a number of things we had to talk about. Let's get right to it. Travis, on Monday, you broke the news that Kel'El Ware, who I believe is number 2 in your transfer portal rankings, committed to Indiana. How did this go down, and what does it mean for the Hoosiers?
Yeah, he was a freshman at Oregon this past season. He exited high school as a top 10 recruit. He was one guy when we were going through those discussions as we were trying to lay out what does this 2022 class, especially those final rankings, really look like. He was in contention for number 1. Like, he was a guy that when it was all said and done, if you fast forward in 4 or 5 years, he could have easily been that number 1 guy. He very much had a case because just how gifted he is. But the issue that we had then is the issue that we still have today. And that is, does this kid really love basketball? Does he love to compete? His motor has always been extremely, extremely spotty. And so his consistency and production hasn't always been great. But after a rocky season, he showed some promise early on at Oregon. He decided that he needed to find a new home. And so this time around, he put his name in the transfer portal, said he was not going to be entering the NBA draft. He was projected potentially as a second-round pick. Wouldn't have surprised me to see him get a promise there. But moving forward after he hit that portal, had his name called by nearly every single coach in the country. Basically had his pick. And as he went through this, he really did a lot of homework, did a lot of digging into trying to find the right fit. He wasn't going to mess it up this time around. And so as he was going through, he had Alabama that was pretty heavily involved. He was actually going to take a visit there, but he did end up canceling because he went to Indiana and knew that was the place for him. And so, yeah, after this weekend, he sat on it, and on Monday, the news broke.
You know, this to me is one of those situations where, like, the initial high school evaluation was spot on because, to your point, he's a prospect that rose up the rankings last year in large part because started to get the NBA feedback coming out of the 2022 McDonald's All-American game where everybody was really taken by his talent. I saw the exact same thing a couple months later with USA Basketball in the trials for, I believe it was the U18 national team with Cam Whitmore, Anthony Black. He was the most obviously talented prospect in that setting as well. But the eval has been the exact same since the very beginning. It's the body language, it's the motor, it's the lack of physicality. It's just a matter of whether or not he's willing to play as hard and do the work necessary to maximize his very obvious talent. And that talent is a 7-footer who can catch, run, jump, has touch out to the 3-point line, really has every basic tool you could ask for, but has just not maximized them yet. So his production had actually decreased throughout the course of the season at Oregon. So I guess Oregon, I should say. So I guess my question is this. Is Mike Woodson the guy who can get the most out of Kel'El Ware? Because if he is, we're looking at still, you get a lot of chances when you're as talented as he is and as big as he is. And if he puts it all together, this is still a potential lottery pick next year.
I would say there's definitely a chance. I'm obviously having him number 2 on my board. I'm still holding out hope and fairly optimistic that he can turn this ship around. And Mike Woodson clearly has had some success at Indiana with what he did with Trace Jackson Davis. Trace Jackson Davis did a phenomenal job of developing and made a jump and was one of the best players in the entire country this year. He's going to be a challenging head coach to play for. He is not going to let Ware just continue it with his bad habits that he's been able to have over the past few years and just rely solely on talent. It doesn't work anymore. And one of the aspects of these evaluations that frankly we never can predict. You never know when it's going to come, but these kids are going to fall flat on their face at some point. They're going to face adversity, and Kel'El Ware has faced that adversity this year. So now the question is, how will he respond? And to me, how he went through this decision-making process, vetting these schools, making sure he is going to the right place, somewhere that's going to challenge him, and also that can develop him and give him good opportunity. That leaves more room for me to continue to be optimistic that, yeah, he can turn this thing around. But again, Mike Woodson's going to be challenging for him. Is he going to sink or is he going to swim? If he swims, Indiana fans are going to be thrilled with what he can bring to the floor. And honestly, in a year from now, if he does really rise to the occasion and rise his, I guess, his competitiveness and his motor, because that's what it's really all about. If he does all those things, we're looking at a top 5, top 10 pick in next year's NBA draft.
Yeah, because remember, the 2024 NBA draft is absolutely wide open. That was the overwhelming sentiment of NBA scouts in the last couple of weeks as they went to first the McDonald's All-American game, then Geico Nationals, then the Nike Hoop Summit. I just kept hearing, gee, there really is no consensus number one, to which I replied, yeah, no kidding. But that was, as it relates to 2024's draft, we had another bit of news that you broke on Tuesday. So it was Kel'El Ware on Monday. On Tuesday, you began the day by removing your crystal ball for Mackenzie Mgbako, who had previously signed a national letter of intent with Duke. Shortly after that, Kyle Filipowski announced that he would, in fact, return to Duke for his sophomore season. So you started to see how the potential logjam up front with Mark Mitchell already returning could potentially have impacted things with Mgbako. So Mgbako, who's the leading scorer, I believe, in the last weekend's Nike Hoop Summit, certainly going to have a wide variety of suitors. In fact, it was already reported he heard from 50 schools within the first 6 hours. I don't know if that is something that is documentable or not, but I don't know if that's a word either, but we're going to go with it. So my question to you is, one, let's start with this. Any intel on where Mackenzie could be leaning or looking at this point, as he is now certainly one of the best available prospects back on the board in 2023.
Yeah, I mean, he's got a case to be made amongst Bronny James when going to these All-Star games. He's a player that we've been talking about. Could Mackenzie be sliding? But regardless, he is getting his phone. His phone is ringing by every single school's reaching out to him, essentially. But the schools that I've been hearing in particular, or the options, I should say, that I've been hearing in particular, one, Louisville. They have Nolan Smith on staff. There's a previous connection there. Obviously, being a former Duke assistant, being a part of that initial recruiting process for Mgbako. We all go back, Mgbako was one of the first kids to come off the board in this 2023 class. So there's a connection there, and there's also a big need and an opportunity for Louisville to continue making splashes on the recruiting trail. So don't sleep on them when it comes to them making a very, very strong push on getting Mackenzie Mgbako. Another option here is the pro route. Would not surprise me at all to see him potentially go maybe the G League. Maybe we could see him go overtime. Maybe we could see him go to the NBL. We're hearing the NBL is involved with a handful of prospects already. So could Mackenzie do that? It's very much a possibility. And then one other team that we've been hearing a little buzz on is an interesting one, and that's the North Carolina Tar Heels. So could he end up flipping over to their arch rival? Possibly. There's still a whole lot to play out, but the two primary ones, I won't say North Carolina is a primary school I'm looking at, but two primary options I'm looking at right now is Louisville and the pro route.
All right. Now, before we go back to North Carolina, because we'll certainly do that, want to revisit Duke, lose Mackenzie Mgbako, but Kyle Filipowski coming back, joining Mark Mitchell, joining Tyrese Proctor, in my mind, sets them up to be the preseason #1 team in the country. What does this all mean for Duke? Because in my mind, it was going to be challenging for Mackenzie to find the type of minutes that a five-star prospect usually wants as a freshman. When you talk about having Flip and Mitchell coming back in the front court, having Sean Stewart, having TJ Power already in that recruiting class to fight for minutes, and then also being active in the transfer portal, looking for further reinforcements up front. So what do we make of the situation next year at Duke and how it might shake out from a lineup perspective?
I know Duke fans are going to be jumping to conclusions and just kind of getting a little bit out of sorts that they just lost a top 10 recruit, but I'll say all is going to be just fine. They had
this was a good day for Duke. I mean, like I heard that somebody said to me, like, "Oh, bad headline for Duke." I was like, "You kidding me? They just got flipped back. Like this just got too crowded for Mackenzie." I mean, that's basically what happened, right?
Yeah, they just got a first-team All-American coming back next year. And Mackenzie, when we look at this 2023 recruiting class, we have him currently ranked number 7 in the country. But when you look at the difference between him and TJ Power, who's coming in behind or with him in that class, honestly, there's a case to be made that TJ's better. I'm one of those guys that is very much on the TJ train. I think he's extremely skilled. He's smart, and he can really shoot the lights out of the basketball. So when you look at the roster, it's almost a logjam at that 4 position, 4-3,
Yeah.
these versatile forwards. They have a lot of them coming in. And so there's a bit of a logjam. So like you said, there's a little bit of a minutes thing going on there. Was not necessarily the reason why Mackenzie got out of his national letter of intent. But all in all, it is definitely a great day for Duke to have Kyle Filipowski coming back. That sets them up alongside Tyrese Proctor and Mark Mitchell. And again, with this talented core of freshmen you got coming in to help fill some roles and not necessarily any stars. I think Jared McCain was an absolute stud when we go back to the McDonald's All-American week. He was one of the best players, I thought, every single day out on the floor. He's kind of maxed out in terms of there's not much upside and potential there, but he's a really good basketball player who's going to be able to impact on day one. So when you pair all these guys together, Duke's got a hell of a team next year.
And the thing about McCain and Power is both of those guys, we can get into who's better and you can make an argument for either one. But the thing about Power and McCain in particular is I think those guys are really well suited to come in and be complementary players. When you're returning Flip and Mitchell and Proctor, you've kind of already got your alphas and you've got the guys who are going to play with the ball more than others. And so someone like TJ Power, you talked about his shooting. He's a more versatile defender than Mackenzie. He's probably a little bit better of a passer. He doesn't need the same volume offensively. So I think in that complementary role, I would agree with you that he'd have an easier time getting on the floor, especially if they're committed to still playing big because he's got that extra defensive versatility. So certainly I think although I'm sure sorry to see Mackenzie go, this was a good day for Duke. All right, now we'll stay in the state with the arch rival, North Carolina. They have been rebuilding the roster. We saw Caleb Love go to Michigan. I think that's probably a good spot for him because it's going to offer him a lot of volume with what Juwan Howard's got to replace there. But North Carolina, they brought back RJ Davis, they brought back Armando Bacot, and they've gotten a couple of additions in the transfer portal. Where does this roster stand right now?
Honestly, to me, I still have a lot of questions on where they're going to be going from here. They've added Paxson Wojcik, and today they added Jalen Withers. And Withers is a guy that he's been at Louisville for a few years now. A guy that every single year, just being right down the road, it's a kid we always talk about, like, is this going to be the year he taps into his talent and his potential and becomes a star? Frankly, he just hasn't. So I thought that move was very interesting. You're looking at a role guy that just wasn't very reliable for a Louisville basketball team that obviously this past season really didn't go very well. So it's going to be a matter of, can Hubert Davis tap into his potential and really turn him into a starter for them, or is he just going to be coming off the bench playing a small role for them? Paxson Wojcik, tremendous shooter, fits in alongside a guy like RJ Davis. Paxson doesn't need the basketball in his hands, and that is something I thought that they really struggled with over the last 2 years even when they made the magical Final Four run. Those two guards in RJ Davis and Caleb Love, there's only one basketball, and those are a lot of shots and a lot of dribbling between the two of them to share. But with Paxson Wojcik coming in, you get a shooter who doesn't need the basketball in his hand. So that frees up RJ Davis to just play with a little bit more freedom, as if he needed any more, but be just more who he is. So with those guys coming in alongside Armando Bacot, they got a core there. But I think they're going to need to get more in the transfer portal, and obviously they're continuing to work there. You're hearing they're in there with Harrison Ingram, potentially Cormac Ryan. So they've cast the net there, but they still need to secure more to especially prevent them going back to the NIT. Although they did reject that invitation, but going back to the NIT next year.
And given some of the names that we saw come off the board this weekend, the transfer portal now is getting to the point where it's starting to dry up. There's not quite as many immediate impact players still on the board, certainly plenty, but it's going to be interesting because there are a number of teams, Kansas among them, that needs to get some major reinforcements here before the portal comes to an end. All right, now another major headline this weekend, we'll go to the high school ranks in the class of 2024. We've seen the trend of early commitments continue. We had Andre Mills, the top 150 prospect in that national class of 2024. He announced a commitment to Texas A&M live here on the 24/7 Sports channel. Simultaneously this weekend, kind of spring grassroots basketball has gotten underway. The recruiting period, the live period, if you will, is now only about a week away. We'll be back on the road, but A little bit of big news here. Trey Johnson, the number 1 prospect in the national class of 2004. Our own Brandon Jennings watched him play. And this fall, it seemed like this decision was going to come down to Baylor and Texas, but it doesn't necessarily look that way anymore. What's the latest on the number 1 in 2024?
Yeah, he's heading to Kansas, and that's a huge visit for the Jayhawks and Bill Self. They have a great track record when it comes to developing talented players. And Trey Johnson is the best talent in the 2024 class. We talk about the argument for that number 1 spot all the time. You can talk about the best prospect, Trey Johnson, or you can talk about the best player, and there's a case to be made for Dylan Harper. But Trey Johnson, honestly, when we were at the USA Basketball in the Final Four in Houston last week, or at this point, maybe it was 2 weeks ago, doesn't matter. But Trey Johnson looked phenomenal. Brandon Jenkins has been just praising the way that Trey has been playing over the last high school season. I didn't get a chance to see him during his junior year of high school with his high school team, but I mean, at the Final Four, he was outstanding. His body looks great. He's in great shape. He's starting to fill out. But while he's starting to fill out, he still looks really young in the face. So you know he's going to continue to grow and really get a lot stronger. His athleticism is really starting to come in. And then the one thing that's always stood out about Trey is he just knows how to fill it up. He can score from all 3 levels. So, this is definitely a big development in the recruitment realm. We're also not ruling out the potential that he could go the pro route. He would definitely be an absolute prize for somebody like the G League. There's been rumblings around that option, but this thing is still early in his recruitment. And I think we'll start to really see this thing pick up and some major developments again here in the spring.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I totally agree with your assessment. I think his Trey Johnson's physical tools appeared to be going to the next level last week in Houston with USA Basketball. You can see when you watch prospects from a very young age, there comes a point in time, ideally, where you can see some of those tools start to click physically. They're moving with a little bit extra pace, a little bit extra force, and that seems to be what we are watching Trey go through right now. As you mentioned, he is a proven scorer. So the fact that his recruiting is evolving alongside that is very, very interesting, with Kansas getting in the mix with that as well. All right, now, next week, we hope to be back in the studio. Until then, you can visit 247sports.com for continued coverage of the transfer portal, high school recruiting, NBA draft, and even this week, a look at the top NBA rookies. We ranked 1 through 14 in accordance with the lottery, looked back at where they were drafted, looked back where they were ranked in high school to try and give the 30,000-foot view of where the top NBA players came from, so we can try and adapt those lessons to our current evaluations, whether it's in the NBA draft big boards or the high school rankings. All of that is live right now, 247sports.com. And of course, if you're watching this in the 247 Sports channel, keep it there for all the late breaking recruiting news in both basketball and football. We'll see you next week.